using. Sometimes venues don't have promoters at all. Sometimes they do. And sometimes promoters won't work specifically in one venue. They might work across a number of venues. But it's good to know the difference. So if you get in touch with the venue, they might turn around and say, actually, we don't book any shows here. Someone else will hire our venue and will book shows in. So it's really good to know the difference between that. Just because you want to play in a certain venue doesn't mean that that venue can actually are actually the people to get in touch with about playing a show in that venue. And just because the promoter seems to be doing shows in one place doesn't necessarily mean they're doing that. That's the only place they're doing shows in. So it's a really good thing to know the difference. Cool. I'm also going to say I did have the chat up earlier, so I might have to grab it again. If you've got any questions in any of this, please just chuck it in the chat and I will have a look. Cool. Great. Thank you very much for the comments. I've just seen everything. Cool. Yeah. Any questions you want, put them in the chat. Right. So what I'm going to do now is go on to what happens after you get booked for a show. If you've made enough noise and have had enough attention, or a kind of have been asked by a promoter to play a show, and this process is called advancing. So advancing means sorting everything out in advance. And the best thing to do is get as much information as possible so you don't turn up and you're surprised by something, whether that's the right equipment or the right time or the right place even. So getting as much information as possible up front is really, really important. And it goes both ways. And that is something I'll come on to a little bit, and that's to do with your tech spec. But stick to email, like I said, keep everything on email so you can go back and reference it. It might even be, that keeping it and keeping a screenshot on your phone or something, or even if you've got a printer, printing out the details of a gig is always really good as well. Find out the promoter's name, their telephone number, and their email. Knowing their name so you can kind of turn up at the venue and go, oh, is so-and-so here? It's a really good idea. Having their telephone number to, if you're late for the show and you need to call them on the way, it's a really good idea. And then having an email so you can, like I said, stick to email with everything. It's also really good to have the venue name. You might be like, oh, I'm going to go play Bristol, but you don't know the name of the venue. Where exactly it is, there's also stuff about like parking stuff, and if you're going to go by car. Their telephone number, just in case it is all in-house or something, or the promoter's not there yet, and their email. The email is kind of, with a venue, is usually to do with the technical side of things, because venues might have their own in-house sound engineers, which I'll get onto a little bit later. You want to know what time you load in, which is arrive at the venue and load your equipment in. This time might be a long time before what's known as your sound check, which is when you test everything with audio. But a load in might mean you have to get into the venue earlier and make sure everyone's there. So you've got sound check time as well, which is when you're going to test everything that sound to make sure it sounds okay. And then your stage time, which is what time you go on, what time you're performing. Your set length, which is kind of how long you could perform for, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. You don't want to turn up and then go, oh, so you got 2 hours of material and you've only got 3 songs. So that's a really kind of important thing as well. Settlement, and that's basically how much you're going to get paid. I could talk a little bit about getting paid at gigs. It's a question I get asked quite frequently. How much should I get paid? How much do people usually get paid? Should I do a gig for free? It's a really difficult question, and usually, yes, you should know where to get how much you're getting paid up front. Definitely, that's great. How much will depend on what kind of artist you are, what kind of level you are, what kind of level the venue is at. But usually, if you're not getting your expenses covered, there needs to be a really good reason for it. And that's usually about exposure. And you really need to kind of judge that. That's a very, very long subject I could do another entire talk about. So let's just end that there. What else have we got? We got the PA details, which is about, might be some terms we can kind of catch up on later, but that's about how much you can hear and like how loud it could be possibly. That's less important, I think. Solora Power says never settle for less than your travel expenses getting covered, which is a really, really good point, because otherwise you're going to be operating at a loss. You could also add in the point that you got to rehearse and you pay for equipment and stuff like that, but travel expenses are kind of the bare minimum. I'm jumping about all around to try and keep focused. Backline details. A backline is anything that isn't an instrument that you need to perform in terms of on stage. Okay, that was too broad of a thing to say. A backline generally is a guitar amp, a bass amp, or a drum kit. It's not a keyboard, that's an instrument. Usually not a keyboard stand. We usually ask you to bring your keyboard stands with you, but backline is generally the equipment you kind of put stuff through on stage. The difference between a backline and a PA is often a venue will not have their own backline. Some of them do, but some of them don't. And sometimes you might have to sort out which band is bringing the backline, if everyone's bringing the backline, if one act are bringing a backline. So that is a kind of different thing that you need to make sure you've got. If you turn up and find out, oh, I can't play my bass because no one else is going to lend me their bass amp, or you turn up and the promoter's like, where's your bass amp? Kind of, you said you were going to bring one. That's a really important point to get covered. Accommodation. This, will vary, but I would say don't play a gig that's further than 3.5 hours out. That's a very maximum, you know, and it also depends on how late you're playing. I remember we played a show up in Nottingham, and what took about 3 hours to get there took 5 hours to come back because I had to keep stopping because it was really late. And you really need to work out if going a certain distance, especially to play an evening gig, is going to require you to stay overnight, because the last thing you want to do is coming back at 2 a.m. and you're tired from playing a gig. And the other benefit of accommodation is if you're over 18, you can have a drink. Another good thing to find out is about if there's a poster, or usually online, a bit of a graphic to share around to anyone who wants to come to the show. And when the gig's going to be announced, because you might get booked for a gig, but the venue or the promoter don't want to put it all out until it's finalized or it's ready. There's a lot of shows in a calendar of a venue that aren't going to get put out there until the right time. So you don't want to you want to make sure you're on top of that, and that's a kind of another element of kind of promoting the show. So all of that information is really fantastic to get up front, and the best way to do it, like I said, is through email. This is from quite a long time ago. This is when I advanced a festival for a band called Junior Bill, and the festival's called True Fest. It's a really lovely festival. It's a really well organized festival. I sent this email in April, and the festival was the start of August. That's how prepared I was in advance. And I got a message back from Sam almost a day later. But it's great to have all this information. Usually, if it's that far in advance, you might not get all the information, but it's always great to try and get that information in as soon as possible. What I then tend to do with that information, especially if I'm going on tour or I'm working with a band, but as a band yourself, what you should have is what I call an advance sheet. And that's a spreadsheet, I love a spreadsheet, of all the information you need. So that kind of looks like this. So this again is from 2017. It's kind of when I started making this presentation. And I think it's just kind of sums up a lot of the work that I've done in terms of working with artists, especially. I kind of have shifted more over to working in venues. But you can see I've got the name of the show, if the show has been confirmed, the date, where it is, if it's part of a tour, who the promoter is, their information, what the venue is, that information, all the times, how long the set is, how much you're going to get paid, how long it takes to get there. Have we sent the tech spec yet? Do I know what the sound system is like, and if the backline is there? This is all really important information, and getting this all nice and green is what exactly you want. It's really scary when you go into a show and things are yellow or red when you don't understand. You don't know what you're going to expect, especially for me as a sound engineer. So you do want to try and get all this information as early as possible. And Dan says, well, knowing where to park is always a good one if you're driving up. There's also what type of show it is, if it's a festival or a show, how many. That was a weird thing about Junior Bill had a revolving lineup, so there were different members. If it's been announced, if there's any accommodation, who's going up, and if they've got a poster. Okay, has anyone got any questions about advancing a show before I move on to this next bit, which is about technical specs, about kind of Anything like that?
I just wanted to add that it is really important to know the person you're dealing with, especially at like you Focus Wales was on there, Big Love, all that kind of thing. When you go somewhere, there might be multiple people who are dealing with like multiple stages, and you go there and you don't know who you're speaking to. If things are running late, everything's going wrong, you need to know the name of that person, where Dave is, or whoever it is you've been
Yeah.
dealing with. Otherwise, it's just fucking chaos, which it usually is when you get to places.
Yeah, definitely know who you're talking to. You usually get a rep or just like your stage manager or something at a festival. And then it's the same as venues. You got to find out the name of the person you need to talk to. Robert asked, what point do you work out the PRS info with the venue for original songs? That's a really interesting question. That's not necessarily what I talk about in this, but I can give you an answer. You don't need to sort it out at the venue. As long as the venue is PRS registered, you do that on the PRS website, and you can submit set lists. As long as all of those original songs are registered with PRS and have tune codes, you can put your set lists into the website, upload and submit set list to PRS, and then you'll get paid for that show through your PRS. You can even put you can even put cover songs in there, and you don't have to worry about paying anyone for playing that cover song. The artist who originally wrote that song will get paid and might actually be quite happy that you've done that. So let's move on to tech spec. Like Dan said, there's another session on this about in the Breakout Fest, but it's kind of part of this one, and I'm doing it from a bit of an artist perspective as well as a sound tech perspective. So a tech spec or a technical specification, tech spec's kind of a short thing, is all the information about a band that the sound engineer needs, and sometimes even the promoter needs to work out what they need to do for the show. What should a tech spec do? It should provide the necessary details. I wrote a 4-page tech spec once, and I watched as a venue or as a festival stage manager just tore off the 3 extra pages because they didn't need them. And all right, right, only necessary details from now on. Have your contact information on it, really important. Um, as important as having their contact information, they need your contact information as well, which is phone number of someone who isn't driving, especially because obviously you can't answer the phone if you're driving. Complete band technical specification. Note I said complete. It needs to have everything on it and everything that's necessary, and not. Uh, so hang on. I might come to it in a little bit, but also don't forget anything and don't add anything that isn't on your technical specification. I will kind of come back to that. Give preferences, what kind of microphones you want, where you want to be, what you want to hear on stage, and have up to date information. That's again, you don't want to miss anything out, because if you turn up and there's 5 microphones and you want 6, then they don't, or whatever the case may be, then that's kind of going to really throw a spanner in the works, and they're going to blame you, and it's not going to be their fault. It's going to be your fault for not giving up to date information. And yeah, and the opposite is if you turn up and decide, oh, actually, I brought a kazoo with me this time. Can I have an extra microphone? No, stay with what is on the tech spec, because I'm not going to give you anything more if it's not on the tech spec. Especially if I get a tech spec. Not getting a tech spec is another matter altogether. Yeah, I'm just chucking some memes in as I go. Yeah, and if there's anything like extra that's really important to note, like Laura said, Laura's partially deaf, and I think that's a really important note for sound engineers to have. Or kind of any like special requirements you have that can be included in a tech spec as well. This looks really complicated. This is a tech spec I used back in 2017, like I said, but I'm going to break it down. I'm going to go through it really quickly. So stop me if there's anything you need to know, but I'm going to try and be comprehensive in it. Okay, right. So the stuff of it, having a header is always good if you can work that out in words, because if you've got multiple pages, like you might have sometimes, you know where everything is. Clear act name. If you're at a festival or a gig with many artists, you want to be able to find that very quickly as a sound engineer and go, right, this is the next band, this is the tech spec. Version and date, so it can kind of work out if it's quite up to date or if it's the wrong version. Sometimes if you book a show way in advance, you send a tech spec early on and then you send a later tech spec, you get 2 tech specs, you're like, which one is the right one? It's very confusing. Contact. Here, I was a sound engineer, so I had my phone number and email address. What there? Yep, there you go. And then any additional contacts that could be possible. Or if someone, if there's two cars, or if someone, any, the most, if my phone dies on the way there, there's someone else to call. Cool. This is the channel list. I'll just look at this really quickly. I'll break it down a little bit more. So first of all, this is your channel list. You've got a channel number, which is where it usually is on the desk. Sometimes it might change around, but it's good to have everything in order. And it's also good for you writing it. You go, hang on, I've missed out channel 11 here. So that's a kind of good thing to have. You have your instrument name. Sometimes you also include the name of the person whose vocal it is, because then you can just shout at the person going, hey, Rob, do the thing. So that's that. And then so here you got some drums, guitars, keyboards, and vocals. So that's kind of your basic 4-piece, 5-piece band. Here's a quick glossary just to go through. A channel is the name of, or like the number of a input, or kind of what is on the desk. Usually we have channels on the sound desk, and that's kind of the input that's coming in. An input is anything like a vocal microphone, or a guitar, or a drums microphone on a drums, or anything like this. A kick in and out. A kick drum is what we call the bass drum, this biggest drum on the drum kit. I usually call it a kick because calling it a bass drum gets confusing between the bass drum and the bass guitar. So I call it a kick, as in you kick it. Don't literally kick it, but that's what we call. In is when you put a microphone inside the kick drum, and out is when you put the microphone outside the kick drum, and that can kind of give it a different sound. Snare, top and bottom, having a microphone on the top of snare, you can hear the whack. Having it on the bottom, you can hear the actual snare wires itself on the bottom. That's what snare, top, and bottom is. Rack and floor, these are the toms. So rack is a rack tom, which is on top of the bass drum or kick drum, and the floor tom is the one that's on the floor. And then DI box, I could go very specific about what DI box is, but usually a keyboard or a bass guitar or an acoustic guitar goes into a DI box, and that changes an unbalanced signal, which is sort of a weak, unbalanced is kind of, it's in the name, it's not so reliable, into a balanced signal, a reliable signal. And if you've got anything that's not mic'd up, or has the cable coming out of it that doesn't go into an amplifier, it needs a DI box. Cool. Again, if you've got any questions, just chuck them in the chat, because I am going through this very quickly because there's a lot to cover. So you need to say what kind of microphone, if you need a microphone, or if you need a DI box or whatever, or if it's an amplifier. I've gone even more specific here, and I've gone for choices of microphone, because sometimes you want a specific microphone. It might be a microphone that's best for your guitar, it might be a microphone that's best for your voice, or a DI box or whatever. Necessary detail only. Don't add, oh, I want it pink. I don't know. Just the necessary detail. Or options, you can either have it coming out of the bass amp through cable coming out of the bass amp, or DI it from the bass amp. Having options is always good. And if you need stands, sometimes if you're a rapper and you're holding the mic, you don't need a stand. But if you're playing guitar and singing into it, you do need a stand. So that's always really helpful as well. So I can know I need to put 5 stands up, not 4 or whatever. We can talk quickly about effects on things. These are all really complicated, but I'm going to go through what each of them mean now very, very quickly. You can feel free to go up and look them up afterwards, but I'm going to give you a very simple version. If you go and Google what these things are, you're very likely to come across very complicated versions of what these things mean. So a dynamic effect is to do with volume and changing the volume and limiting the volume and things like that. It's all about volume, and it's all about manipulating the volume or the way something comes in and out. So these are technically called an insert. They will take over the whole sound that's coming through, and it takes everything over in terms of that. It's not, you'll see what I mean by the differences. It affects the whole sound that's coming in. These can be include a compressor, which looks like this. A compressor is really complicated to describe. What I'm going to try and do it as simply as possible. A compressor compresses the sound, makes it not as loud as it needs to be. Compressors have loads of different functions, but the best way to describe it is that it will kind of smooth off the sound a little bit, bring it down where it needs to be. Compressors usually go on anything that you don't want to be loud very quickly. This is a very, very quick way of describing it. A gate is something that opens and closes like a gate. A gate is usually used on drums. It could be used on other things as well. If it is used on other things, it's a noise gate. So if there's any background noise, it will make things quiet or silent. If it's noisy, using a gate on drums means you only get the sound of the drum coming through and nothing else. It opens and closes. It's a gate. A limiter is like a compressor, but it stops. Instead of smoothing it off, it stops the sound at a certain point, so it never gets any louder than that. Limiters are usually used only on the speaker system because it stops the speaker system from getting damaged. And the other thing type of effect is a time-based effect. And I'm not talking about like time travel or anything. It's based on an effect which affects the time. It elongates it. It might even shorten it in some cases, or it can double it up. So a kind of a really obvious version of a time-based effect is reverb, which is kind of the sound to make a sound bigger, sound like it's in a bigger space. There's also different types of reverb based on the way they used to be created. A lot of them now are digital. I mean, the majority of sounds you run into now are digital. Reverb essentially kind of adds a bit more ambience to it. Say you're in a very small venue, but you want to sound like you're in a church, you add a church reverb, it makes you sound like you're in a church. It's very kind of echoey. But it isn't an echo. This is one of my favorite pieces of equipment. It's called a space echo. It makes things sound very, very delayed and echo. And that's what I'm on about. A delay repeats the signal. An echo repeats the signal, but it kind of diminishes. And that's a very, very interesting effect. It repeats, it kind of doubles. You can hear that in certain types of music. You don't use it all the time. Also, sorry, that's a really basic kind of. There's other types of effects you can look into, but the difference between those, the dynamic, which takes over the whole thing, and the time-based, is you add a certain amount to time-based effects. You don't. Your reverb won't take over the whole signal. You will add to a reverb. It's very, very complicated, but those are the different types of effects. You don't really need to know the difference between a dynamic and a time-based. Just know that those effects exist. So if you want to add the effects to a tech spec, especially if you want some reverb or delay on your vocal, then that's what you're gonna need. And so you can add it in there, define what type it is. You can have a hall reverb, which makes it sound like you're in a hall. A spring reverb, which makes it sound it's there's this amazing way they used to do reverb where they literally put it through a spring and it gave this very defined sound. There's also something called a plate reverb, and you can learn about what those things sound like and if you want to use them, but usually you just want a kind of hall, room, church reverb, whatever, and then delays. And also you need to say something is essential. So if you've got a bassist who hits very hard but you don't want them to like jump out in the mix, you put a compressor on it. So that's the kind of things that you can have. And then some notes. Spring reverb and Western. I've never heard of spring reverb and Western, so I might have to look that up. Yes, here's some notes. Some stuff about EQ sometimes you can kind of look at, but this is, if there's anything else you want to add to do with an instrument, if you want to say this bass is really loud, so make sure it's kind of turned down below everything else or something like that. It's always really good and helpful for a sound engineer. Or if you've got your own microphone, that's a really important one. If you have your own microphone, let us know in advance, and then we don't have to put a microphone up. We're ready for it. Cool. I didn't know that they use spring reverb. That's interesting. Cool. This is really very visual and obvious what this is. This is a stage plan, and it can kind of just show the sound engineer where everything needs to go, where everything on stage is supposed to go. and I can go, right, okay, so I put microphones down there, put the bass amp there, put the drum monitor there. I know exactly where everything needs to go. This is fantastic. You can just usually draw this in Word or on Paint or anything. And a stage plan is so fantastic because I can just go, right, I know exactly where everything needs to go, rather than having to ask everyone where they're going and what they're doing. Another thing about this is try and stick to the stage plan as well. Sometimes we won't be able to cater to the stage plan if we can't move things around, but we will try our best. Show what the full drum setup is, because that'll be fantastic. I know where to put all the microphones, where you want the monitors to go. If I had a case once where the drummer was deaf in one ear, so we had to move the monitor to the other side of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to hear it. That's a really important detail to kind of remember. And if you don't want a monitor like on your pedal board or something like that, or if you need it put in a certain way, we'll try and cater to that as much as possible. Sometimes you might have grumpy sound engineers. I've been told I'm really nice with sound engineer, so hopefully I'll be able to cater to you. Where exactly you want stuff and where you need power as well. If you bring your own amp, if you're bringing a guitar pedal that needs power, then you need to tell us where the power is going, and then where you want your microphone and where you want your DA. I realize I'm pointing at the screen to kind of show you what to do, but that's not no point doing that. And names and instruments, it's always really good rather than just shouting, "Oh, you on the bass." You can kind of actually put a face to a name and kind of work like that. Uh, no, Jim wasn't left-handed. I think that might be just the way you're looking at it. I think he had two snares, and he's right-handed. So I don't know how that worked out like that. Okay, and then there's another element to stage plans, which is where things are on stage. So you've got upstage, downstage, stage left, and stage right. I, as a sound engineer, I'm looking at it a different way, so I can kind of remember where everything is on stage left and stage right. I went to drama school a little bit, so I know those things. But for you, if you're facing the audience, your left is going to be on your left, and your right is going to be on your right, and that's stage left and stage right. For me, facing you from the crowd, those things can be swapped around. Hopefully, most sound engineers will know the difference between stage left and stage right. This is really important because you need to know about it for stage monitors. So you can kind of say where your stage right mix is, where your center mix is, where your stage left mix is, all that stuff. It's really important to know where all these things are. Yeah. So monitor guides. I don't usually get these from bands. I usually have to work it out for myself, or I have to ask them. If you send a monitor guide as part of a tech spec, sound engineers are going to love you because they don't have to ask you the questions that and things can go much quicker. So I think this is a really, really good example of of a monitor guide, and you can say where your monitor are, if it's a stage wedge, which is speaker, or an IEM, which is in-ear monitors, which is a whole other conversation we might get to a little bit later. That's a very, very interesting thing about having the sound that you need on stage going in your ears directly rather than through a speaker. It has its pros and its cons. Let's just say that. Where it is on stage and what do you need in the monitor, which is so helpful for sound engineers, and we rarely ever get it. So if you can put a tech spec together, try and put a monitor guide in as well. And some notes as well is great. So to kind of a guide. So you can kind of see what I'm doing. With this band, Junior Bill, they do a lot of, they've got a sound called dub. It's sort of to the reggae. And what I did as a sound engineer had a lot of effects. So I put those through the desk I was working with, and I didn't want those to come through the monitors. So if there's an intro track, for example, if you're in a band and you've got an intro track, and the intro track can cue you in to start the first song, you want to put that in the notes, because if they don't put the intro through the monitors, you're like, I can't hear the intro. When do we start? So that's a really good thing to put in your notes as well. Cool. Here's a question break. Has anyone got any question breaks? I know I'm going really fast, but there's lots to cover, and I hope I haven't confused anyone. Yeah, let me know if you've got any questions about that. Oh, good. Everyone good? This is very weird to talk about, having not done a gig in a long time, but I promise you they're going to come around quicker than you can think. And this information is going to be really helpful for you to kind of start out on the right foot again. It might even be a refresher for some of you. So I hope that's kind of helpful. Cool. Okay, good. I hope everyone's understanding what I'm going on about. It's great. Let's go on to gig etiquette, which is kind of what happens when you turn up at a show. Here are the basics. I already spoke about this a little bit earlier. Here's a fun image I found back in 2017, 2018 when I was doing this for the first time of some people trying to load in Venice. And I think, ironically, that desk that's in one of those boxes is called a Midas Venice, but that's just a sound engineer joke for you. Right, you got your load in. That's the time you come in. Thank you. You got your sound check. That's the time you check everything. You might not be fortunate at get enough to get a sound check. So what you might get is a line check, which is literally checking everything sounds like it's working and coming through. This usually happens at festivals or if you're in the middle of a bill at a gig. It's really unfortunate, and giving as much information as possible beforehand to a sound engineer is the best way to deal with a line check. But sound checks are always really, really nice to have. I'll talk to you about what sound check is in a minute. Stage time. That's the time you go on stage. Make sure you don't miss it because you won't be able to play. And load out. That's the time you need to get out of the venue. Sometimes that might even be before it closes because there might be a disco on. And Dan already knows the fun times about having a disco on. That disco seems like such an old word. Club night, basically. Yeah, try to be on time because you can have the best time ever if you're on time because you've got the most time. You might be waiting around for a bit, but if you're there on time, there's so much more like chance I'm going to be able to sound check you. You know, even if you're not getting a sound check, you're not supposed to get a sound check. If you're on time and the headline band isn't on time, you're going to get a sound check and they're not, and that's going to be great because you're going to sound better than the headline act. I don't always get a tech spec. I'll ask you, or you should tell me if you have tech spec. So I'm not surprised. I'm just looking at my notes here. Cool. There's a really big, important thing I want to say about sound checking, which is, or just sound in general when you're playing a show, which is something I learned in IT back in school far too long ago, which is if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. I, as a sound engineer, cannot make you sound better. It's just impossible. It's never going to happen. I'm not going to make you sound better. If you sound bad in a rehearsal room, I can't make you sound better on stage. It's just I'm just given what I'm given, and I have to put it out the best I can. I can't make something better. I can make something sound worse, believe me, but I can't make something sound better. Yeah. So don't expect me to make something sound shinier or better. You know, I can add reverb, I can add delay, but if it sounds bad from the start, I'm not going to be able to give you something good coming out. So please make sure you sound good even before you get onto the stage. So let's talk about some sound check. The big thing you need to do in a sound check is kind of in the name a little bit. It's about the sound. So you really need to listen. And that's not just listening to yourself, which I know a lot of people like to do, but you got to listen to everyone around you. You got to listen to your bandmates on stage. You got to listen to the sound engineer behind the desk, and being aware of what's going on and not noodling on your guitar, not playing with the pedals, listening and being aware whilst you're doing a sound check. It's like really important, and you're going to get the best time out of it if you do it. Um, and this is kind of really good thing to make sure do it one thing at a time. Like you don't have to worry about like playing with another person, just because things get checked one at a time to make sure they sound okay one at a time, and then they'll get checked all together. You don't have to worry. Sometimes a sound engineer like myself will ask two guitars to play together so I can compare, make sure they're coming through at the same level or a level where the lead guitar is louder and the rhythm guitar is quieter. If that is the case, that's what needs to happen. But usually it's one at a time. So don't play until you're asked by the sound engineer, and communicate. Tell me what you want, because otherwise I'm not going to know. I've done so many shows where artists have come up to me afterwards and go, I couldn't really hear myself during that. And I'm like, I can't do anything about that now. You need to have told me at the time. So please tell me what you want. Another thing that isn't in this, but it's really, really important, and it's going to be really, really important to not annoy your sound engineer. Don't play when they're on stage with you, especially if their head is next to an amplifier or a drum kit, because we need our ears to earn a living. Dan makes a good point as well. Sound check isn't a rehearsal. I'm gonna say that later on. Don't practice your songs at the sound check. You don't have time. Sound check is to make things sound good, not to make a song you think is a rubbish sound better by practicing it. It's not a rehearsal. And that's the next thing I'm going to bring up. Yep, that's just me sitting at the desk getting really annoyed that you're not listening. A lot of bands are great. I'm just kind of making sure there are less of the bands that aren't great out there. So I'm going to do a quick glossary of again. This is some very quick words to learn. A monitor is the speaker on stage that is for you. It's not for anyone else. You might share it sometimes, but it's what you hear on stage. A monitor isn't going to give you everything that you're going to hear out the front. If you did that, you wouldn't hear the things you need. Bands don't necessarily need to hear everyone in the band. If you're if you're the drummer and you're not singing, you don't need to hear the backing vocalist if they're not going to cue you in. If you're, I don't know, there's lots of cases where you don't need everything in the mix. Sometimes you do, and sometimes that's really important, but a lot of the time you don't. So really, really think about what you need in the monitor, because as a sound engineer, I can only give you so much before we get feedback or it washes everything out. As a sound engineer, I'm trying to give you as little as possible but as much as you need. So trying to strike that balance is really, really important. So know what you want in a monitor, and a monitor is for you, or if you have to share it. And fortunately, in some circumstances, it's for the band or the artist. It's not for anyone else. So that's your monitor for you. Like I said, there are different types of monitors, but maybe talking about speakers. A jack cable. I sort of mentioned this earlier about DI boxes. A jack cable is a kind of pointy thing. Oh, I got another one. It's a good thing I've got a load of sound equipment. A jack cable, it's going to be hard to see because I'm a little box, but a jack cable looks like that. It's the pointy thing. That's what a jack cable is. That usually goes into guitars, basses, keyboards, and these usually go into amplifiers or DI boxes. A PA. PA is short for public address, which is kind of really weird. But it's generally that's what it was called originally, public address, talking to the public. And that's what a speaker system is. It's usually comprised of the speakers, the mixing desk, and the amplifier that makes everything loud. And sometimes you can kind of throw in microphones and cables and stuff into a PA. Feedback is a really loud ringing thing. If I was in a music venue, I'd demonstrate what feedback is, and it's really annoying. It's the high pitch stuff. Sometimes it's low pitch though, so if you hear a low rumble, that's probably feedback as well. It comes in all shapes and varieties and sizes. And if there's feedback, that means something is hearing itself. It's a very interesting concept, but it starts repeating a frequency because it can hear itself and it keeps amplifying itself. That's what feedback is and does. Phantom power. This is really specific, but it's also really important. Some microphones and especially DI boxes need a little bit more power to amplify what they're doing. And so if you need a phantom power, that's 48 volts of electricity going from the desk or from a battery sometimes into the microphone or DI box, and that can kind of power it. Sometimes you don't want phantom power going through something because it can short it out. It's very, very unlikely, but you need to be aware of what phantom power is. If a microphone isn't working for some reason, or if you've got a microphone or a DI that you use and it's got phantom power on it, it's something you really need to point out to a sound engineer because they might not know about it. Cool. It's usually how a sound check goes. Just trying sometimes. I'm just really trying sometimes. Okay. Here are some tips about sound checking as well. I'm not going to go into every single point about how sound checks work. Like I said, things happen one at a time. You go through each instrument and then talk about what you want in the monitors, and then generally just play a song, a verse, and a chorus, however much you can get out, and make sure it all sounds okay and you can hear everything. Usually you've got a limited amount of time to do it, so it can't last forever, so use that time effectively. Don't turn up an amplifier without asking me or a sound engineer or telling us you need to. You can ask, or if you really need it, you can tell. But if we don't know about it, it goes up and we can't do anything about it because there is a certain amount we can kind of cut out. Usually amplifiers getting louder means I can't boost anything else up on stage because it's overwhelming. So do let us know about that. Make sure you check any boost pedals if you're a guitarist or a bassist or a keyboardist or whatever you've got. If you've got a pedal, if you've got something that changes the volume, make sure you sound check that as well, because it's sound checking and mixing is all about volume. Don't pull your cables out of boxes or amplifiers or anything until, just don't do it. Just don't, because it makes a horrible loud sound. I've done that in Tramshed once. Yeah, bang, and it's not nice. Make sure check first before you pull a cable out, because you will get a big bang. Don't change anything from the sound check. Don't turn anything up. Don't move, swap around. Don't change anything, because it won't sound the same, and you'll be really annoyed that it won't sound the same. And it won't sound the same up front. It won't sound the same for you. And bring your jack lead, because music venues have a finite amount, and or they might not even have them. So make sure you remember it. Just don't be like Baby Yoda. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point as well. Dan's raised. Yeah, I should chuck that in. Is that sound check with everything? If you've got a limited amount of time, do a song which is maybe the most complex, but it's got all the stuff in it, and it's the loudest one. So that's kind of making sure everything is coming through at the same time and working. This is a little bit about mic technique. I'm not sure how well this is going to go over Zoom, because it's going to sound, it might like completely mess with the sound of what it should sound like through a PA or shouldn't sound like through a PA. But essentially, a microphone is designed to point one way, pick up one way. Sometimes there are different microphones that don't, but usually in live sound, they pick up one direction, and that's where the sound is coming from. And so you face that basically away from everything else, because if you pick up something that's coming through a speaker, that feedback, it will hear itself, and that feedback will start to build. There's a very specific way of holding a microphone if you hold a microphone. And if you change the way you hold a microphone, it changes the sound. There is a handle on a microphone. That's the bit you hold. You don't hold the other thing. I keep pointing. I don't know. Doing that will change the sound of a microphone. And I'm going to demonstrate now, and it might sound awful if you've got headphones in, so just a fair warning. If I do this, it sounds markedly different to if I do this. And there is a reason for that. And it doesn't sound better. And it will increase the sound. It will turn the microphone into something that points one direction to something that points in every direction. It will increase feedback. It will make you sound worse. It might look cool. I don't think it does. I don't think it does at all. I think it looks really awful, but that's because I'm a sound engineer and I know that it sounds bad. It will just sound better if you don't touch the top of it. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Cool. So I'm going to move on from tech stuff about for a little bit and talk about performing. And like I said, I've been in a band. I've worked with lots of bands before, and performing is just as important as the technical side, because it is a performance at the end of the day. It's not all about the sound. I don't know if that, yeah, that's coming through on there. So this is a video from a band I've done sound for, called Al Moses. They're based in Cardiff, and this was during their headline show in Club Bach in Cardiff. And that's Dav. His guitar fell off halfway through a show, and he took it in his damn stride. Fair play to him. He put his arms out and just like, yeah, accept that. And that's when I bought them all strap locks. So yeah, the main thing about when things go wrong is don't freak out. It's so easy to freak out and be like, oh no, this is awful. Everything's going wrong. But unless it's something that's happened like that, 99% of the time, the audience isn't going to notice. So, yeah, you just, like a wrong note, or your voice goes a little bit, or you break a string, like 99% of the time, nobody is going to notice that. If you react to it, if you say something about it, if you say the sound is going bad, it's going to draw attention to it. And that's the last thing you want. You want it to feel like you're a seamless musician and everything is fantastic. You don't want to draw attention to it, because it's not only does it make you look bad, it's really unprofessional, and it can kind of really there are a couple of bands I have to admit I will not work with again, because the way they reacted to things going wrong, and it wasn't my fault. And it's just like they will turn around and blame whoever. I could get into a whole rant about that, but it's really important that if something goes wrong, unless it's show stopping, unless it's literally you can't do anything else except fix the problem, don't tell anyone, don't react, carry on and fix it when you can. Another element of things going wrong is feedback. What is it and how can I avoid it? I kind of went over it a little bit earlier. I know there are people that I know who have kind of had really bad experiences with feedback, and it's really unfortunate. And even even perfect sound checks for me have turned into a mess of feedback when a gig has started. And all you can do is work out what the problem is and fix it as soon as possible. There's some ways that I can do it from the desk, or there's some ways you can do it. So, what causes feedback? Like I said, it's something hearing itself. So, if it will it will be a ringing of a certain frequency, and the more that builds, the more it escalates, the more it kind of starts picking up, the louder and louder and louder it will get, and that's when feedback occurs. The way I do it is I take that frequency out. The way you can do it is by avoiding the circumstances of which happens, and that means making sure things aren't too loud and making sure things can't hear themselves. So we hear that, yeah, we hear that in guitar amplifiers, we hear it in from vocal mics and systems, and sometimes you hear it like in acoustic guitar pickups as well. That can be another element of it. If you got a keyboard, you're never going to have problems with feedback. Believe you and me. You might have it from everyone else, but your keyboard's fine, unless you got a delay pedal. That's another thing. The common causes are things hearing themselves, things being too loud, monitors being too loud, not having the microphones rung out properly, which is what sound engineers, you ring it out, as in the ringing in your ears, and the frequencies being taken out. And if you don't have a proper sound check, that can often happen. So, like I said, turn up to a gig early so you can get a sound check done early. How do you stop it from happening? A big one is just turning stuff down. Um, that is usually the case of it. You're more likely to get feedback if things are loud, things are not well tuned to each other, they're overwhelming each other, and you're trying to drive everything up. Loud doesn't necessarily mean better sounding. Sometimes it does. That's a very technical thing that I could get into, but loud usually means everything is going to be too overwhelming. It's going to overwhelm the human ear. That happens in a lot of cases. Um, and unless you've got a really well tuned out, great system, loud doesn't always mean better. Cool. Here's some more performance tips. This first one might be contentious. Stop telling me that it's the first song you wrote. You wouldn't believe how many shows I've done where someone's like, oh, "This is the first song I ever wrote," and I'm like, "Okay, I don't understand why that's important." Not, I think it draws attention to the fact that it might not be as good as your other songs, and I think that's really important to think about. Or the opposite of that, which is we just wrote this song yesterday, so it might not be as good as our other songs. It's essentially what you're telling me. It doesn't. It's great to talk about why a song is written, why you've written a song like that. I think artists who do that are really interesting. Sometimes you don't have to even talk between songs, and that could be quite cool as well. I quite like that, but don't tell this is the first song you ever wrote. Ask me for things. Again, I said this earlier. Do it politely. Don't be like, "Hey, I can't hear myself." It's like, "Hey, could I just have this up a little bit? Thanks very much." I mean, you don't have to go quite that polite, but you ask for things if you need them. Otherwise, you just won't get them. We won't know if there's an issue. You can't just we can't just guess sometimes. So sometimes I have a bit of a sixth sense in terms of some things are going wrong on stage. Other times I'll have no idea. So do ask. Or if you don't have a microphone, ask someone who's got a microphone. Or sign language is good. Point a microphone up, or speakers up, or guitar up, or down. Less likely is down, but up is always good an idea. I've always taught bands that I work with to do that. Yeah, I just have to repeat myself. Yeah, don't. It's really nice to have a drink on stage, but try and avoid mixing cables and liquid. Try and avoid thrashing about if there's loads of liquid on stage, or if you want to thrash about, don't put liquid on stage, because I've had a couple of gigs that have ended in nothing because everything turns off because there's all liquid all over the cables. I'm going to go over a few more things quite quickly, and then we're going to have some questions. If you've got a quieter or softer voice, you can either specify that. You can work with sound engineers. You can get in-ear monitors. That's another thing I can bring up. Or you can buy your own microphone. And this microphone I'm using now is a microphone I bought the beginning of last year. Ironically, it didn't get to use it very much. And it is, you know, everyone's got their own amount of money that they can kind of afford. If you've got a quiet voice, this is fantastic though. This is an SC Electronics. I don't work for them. I didn't. I had to buy this microphone, and this is just a endorsement that isn't sponsored. It's an SC Electronics V7, and it's the same microphone that Billie Eilish uses. And if you know Billie Eilish, she's got a very quiet voice. It's always a really good idea to have your own microphone, especially nowadays. But make sure you get a good quality one. This is a really good one for quiet voices. There are other cases where you don't have that luxury, but if you work with a band or if you work with backing tracks, it's always good to bring everything else down so the vocals can be heard above everything else. Because a lot of the time people want to hear the vocals over everything else, and that's kind of a really important thing I do as a sound engineer, trying to bring the vocals up. Yeah, compromise. If you want a loud guitar amp, if you need a loud guitar amp, maybe compromise by working out how to best to do that. You can kind of, there are models where you can just like plug into, I don't know, there's loads of things to do. A really good compromise though is not having the guitars out facing forward. It sounds like a really strange idea, but if you point them towards you or on an angle, you can kind of get some stands to do that, or even across the stage, you're not overwhelming the vocal mics, and you can maybe eke a little bit more sound out of a guitar amp, and that's quite a good tip. I've done that a couple of times where I've pointed guitar amps into the stage rather than out of the stage, and it doesn't overwhelm the vocals from the PA. It doesn't go into the microphones as much. It's a really good idea. Monitor mixes. Yeah, I kind of went over this earlier about knowing exactly what you want and kind of making sure you don't have anything you don't need. You don't need to hear the tambourine. You really, really don't sometimes. In-ear monitors. There is a really big issue with in-ear monitors, especially on smaller stages, is that you will hear a lot of stuff you wouldn't necessarily hear through a stage monitor, and that often is cymbals from drums. If you're doing pop music, it can be fantastic sometimes, but there's a phrase that I borrow sometimes from Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, who said the first time you put in-ear monitors in, it felt like there was a goldfish bowl on his head. It can be very helpful to hear everything up front, but it can be very disconnecting and can kind of really affect your performance. So if you are going to use in-ear monitors, if you are considering using in-ear monitors, I would try them out first rather than investing a hell of a lot of money into them, because a decent pair can fetch like minimum 350 quid. So you really want to consider whether you need in-ear monitors. You can get wireless stuff, which is very expensive. You can get wired stuff, which usually drummers use, and that is kind of when I would say in-ears are a good idea. There will be some venues that won't be able to deal with in-ear monitors as well, so you need to be recognized that it's quite not a niche thing, but quite an upmarket thing to do. Cool. Yeah, I've already said this, so that's fine. Play all your sounds. Yeah, go through the things. Yeah, that's a good point as well. Dan's just made. If you've got a really nice studio mic, well, studio is in the name, but if you've got a really nice condenser mic, that doesn't translate to live. There's a difference between a condenser mic, which is usually powered and usually you use at home as a studio thing, and a live dynamic mic. So yeah, there's a really big difference between those things. Cool. Sorry, I know I've gone over quite a bit. Like I said, it's going to be 45 minutes, but that's cool. Yeah, that's a good. I don't really care if you don't learn my name. It's fine. I have a problem with people learning people's names. If I'm working with 3 or 4 bands in a night and I have to learn everyone's names, it's not going to happen. So don't worry. But learning the sound engineer's name will get my attention quicker. Cool. Has anyone got any questions? Because I know I covered a hell of a lot. And have you ever had a band ask you to have a movie sample used during a section to replicate a song on their album? Yeah, I've had them as intros. During a song, you won't get sound engineers queuing stuff during a song because there's so much skill and timing and stuff involved that a sound engineer who works with an artist will cue a sound off, and even then they might get nervous about it because they might not be like a full-time musician. doing an intro to a song is fine. You just got to work out where you're going to come in, so there's no awkward gap between the end of the song. And like I said earlier, if there's like an intro to a song, um, you need to hear it through the monitors. You need to let the sound engineer know that that's it. Does that answer your question? Yeah, and any other questions as well, let me know I blasted through that, but there was a lot to get through. If I missed anything,
I just wanted to add, fantastic talk, is brilliant, Ed.
thank you.
I learned loads from having to do sound at a gig. I acted completely different when I was a musician again than after doing the live sound, because you understand how stressful and hard it is to do what a sound engineer is doing. So I would recommend to everybody, because you will probably have to do it at some point in your life, learn how to use a desk, just have a go. It's not scary. It's not, you can't really break things, can you? You know.
Uh, I have. Yeah, it does really give you a perspective on the other side and the limitations, especially when it comes to live sound. Um, I think that's if you're a studio engineer, you think you can drive things as much as possible. But with live sound, you're really kind of working with what within a limitation, and those limitations can change from venue to venue. If you're outdoors, you can have a lot more freedom. If you're indoors in a small venue, it's a lot more restricted. So, for example, in the Moon, lots of people ask me to put bass through the monitors, and I literally cannot do that because of the way the system is. We have monitors on top of sub bass speakers. So if I put bass through the monitors, it will reverberate and match and feedback that way. It's very, very weird sensation or kind of thing. And I can't do that. So you will understand very quickly there are limitations to what you can do in live sound. Sometimes you have to accept that. There is one thing that I will point out that is a trick that sound engineers try and put across to you, which is, oh, it'll sound better when there's more people in here. Um, there is some there is some logic to that, but it's not in the way that most sound engineers will try and
That
confess.
was when you were talking about sound checks. I was thinking a lot of the times when I've had the privilege of having a sound check, it sounded completely different when people are in
Yeah.
the room. Um, how do you kind of counteract that as a performer?
You tell the sound engineer you can't hear things as well. Yeah, there is a real challenge in that, especially if you've got a noisy crowd. The way, unfortunately, I've run into it before is there's a venue in Cardiff. Well, there was a venue in Cardiff called Goody Who. We would do a sound check. It would sound beautiful, and then 100 people would pile into that room and make loads of noise, and I can't hear anything anymore. And that inevitably will happen. But the idea that it will sound better if there are more people in the room is completely wrong. In fact, it's the opposite. um, Things will get more muffled. You'll have less high end because to put it in a little bit of a gross way, there's more fleshy bodies in the room and they soak up more things. They soak up more high frequencies. They soak up the sound. Um, Generally, it won't sound better. Generally, it will be quieter. There is very rare case. It will sound less echoey. I think that's the only difference. So I think
It probably
you know.
feels better to you as a performer because there's some people there who are watching you and
Oh
dancing,
yeah. If there's no
but it
one
might not
there,
sound better, I guess.
I used to call this when I was in a band, and I still do call it. If no one's there at a gig, I call it a glorified band practice. But it's always a good experience to play in a venue with a PA. I'd love to perform my own music as well as lighting tech in the future. Do you think that's possible? Like we're just going one path, or we're supposed to go? It's a really good question. I was a musician when I was in university. I did a course that's sort of available still. It's called Live Event Technology. I did it in the University of South Wales. Um, I think you're asking. I'm not sure if you're asking the same question. Hang on. As a career way, I'm going to answer it in two different ways. As a career way, being a lighting tech and a musician, sure, keep your options open. I did live event technology because my form tutor in high school told me I should keep my options open. I could have done live event technology, which is sound, rigging, video, lighting, all of that stuff, or I could have just done lighting and I would have not had my options open. it'd be fantastic to be a musician and go on and do great, big, huge things and fantastic, amazing things. But if you keep your options open, that's a good thing. If you're talking about doing lighting as a musician, that's also a very different thing. You will not be given the privileges of doing your own lighting unless you're a massive band, unless also you bring your own equipment. I have had bands come in before who have used their own lighting, um, to varying degrees of effect. Sometimes it looks amazing, sometimes it looks terrible, and I don't know why. You will have to again agree with uh, whoever is doing the tech or the venue or whatever, because there might be some issues with lighting. Okay. Cool to add. Yeah, it does really add to an effect. I think especially like electronica sets, the more exciting stuff I've seen in smaller venues is where they've added their own stuff. There's a guy we know called Dead Method who does that, and like Dan said, Maddie do it as well, and they do it in a very interesting theatrical way, and I think that's really cool. My voice varies in volume between lower and softer and higher and louder. How do I manage that uh, so I don't blow out the engineer's ears? That's a really good point. I think letting them know in advance that you have a very dynamic and a very change like a voice that changes in volume is a really good idea. And what we do in that case is we use a compressor. So if it gets to a certain volume, it will still say the same volume as it is when you're being quiet. It's just about, it's not so precise as it is in the studio. But in live events, yeah, like I will use a compressor. So when you go up to that really loud bit, it won't be so loud. It will be louder. There will be a case where it will be, you can hear the difference, but it won't be so extreme. Yeah, compressors are fantastic. Um, they're very complicated. I wouldn't give you I wouldn't say set this compressor at this level, because it changes every time, it changes from venue to venue. But say I've got a very dynamic voice and a compressor would be advised. I think it's a lot of bass needs compression, because you having very loud low notes and very quiet high notes. That's another thing. Vocals and bass are usually things I compress quite a lot, and then guitars I just compress because guitarists like having things loud, so I have to push them down a little bit. Yeah, it's anyone got any? The other thing I like to talk about as well is if anyone's had any issues with. I know it's been a long time since anyone's done a gig, but if anyone's had any problems at their gigs, and how, if they have any questions about how you would solve that going forward, or just any questions about live sound at all, or just not just the sound aspect, but also about shows and kind of
Eva's got a question. She's got her
yeah,
hand up.
go.
Yeah, I'll just say it because I've got a headache and I don't want to type. Um, what is like the best way to find venues? Because as much as I would really like to perform, I haven't really got like a name. I'm not really part of a scene yet. But I think like the only way to really get yourself out there is just to start. And like, where would I go about finding like venues or like promoters who would be able to I don't know the word for it, but you get what I mean.
Yeah,
You understand what I'm trying to say.
I think the best thing to do is to start going to gigs, when obviously when they're possible again, and to kind of feel that out, and um, you get a real sense of an idea about a scene. Sometimes it's harder to kind of, depends where you live. I'm really lucky to live in Cardiff, with the venues we have, and I can just pop down and see a gig in a venue. But there's also the idea of, you know, if you're not in that area and going down on a Friday or Saturday night to see a band, you also got to consider whether those bands can be cover bands as well. Some places will only have cover bands play. Some venues will not have cover bands at all. They'll only have original music. So that's the kind of thing you need to work out. Um,
I
it's
I would say open mics.
Yeah,
If you're just
yeah, of
starting out,
course.
chat to people. You'll soon work out kind of if you see someone performing and you're thinking, oh, they're a similar style to me. Follow them on Facebook, add them as a friend, chat to them, and you'll just make friends. That's
Yeah,
generally what I've done.
I completely forgot about open mics. Open mics are a really, really good opportunity, I think, sort of to develop your sound as well. And if you're a full band, open mics aren't so viable for you. But to develop your sound, that usually you end up going in rehearsal rooms and kind of honing your sound that way. But as a solo performer, where there's no one to kind of tell you, oh, I don't really like that guitar part, open mic is a really good idea. Usually, it's kind of they vary in quality. Um, I'm not saying like, sorry, I'm not saying the open mics themselves or the talent playing those open mics, but like the tech kind of setups. You might have venues that will kind of take on like a really interesting electronic set at an open mic, but it's quite unlikely because you only get 2 or 3 songs at an open mic, especially if they're quite oversubscribed. Um, the Porter's one in Cardiff is fantastic. Once again,
Eva's under 18.
oh, crap. That is a really
It's frustrating,
tear
isn't
my
it?
hair out about under 18 shows. I really, 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 really hate them. I started being really interested in going to gigs when I was 11 years old. And so I had to suffer through 7 or 8 years of not being able to get into shows. And I really, really feel for everyone who can't do that, or even is at a level where they can perform at shows and they're not allowed because they're under 18. And we at the Moon, we try and open up as much as we can to be all ages, but we are unfortunately limited by our license sometimes. Um, there will be opportunities, and I think even more so if you look at kind of community centres and stuff like there's one in Cardiff called Catay's Community Centre. I'm just going off what I know, but kind of reaching out to like youth centres and stuff that have music projects. Rec Rock is fantastic, and I'm really thankful that there is that sort of that program to kind of give those opportunities. We provide some time at Hub Festival for Rec Rock for like performances. But yeah, open mic is a really good idea to develop your sound. You will get immediate feedback, and usually everyone's really nice open mics. Usually, it's quite awkward, and sometimes you kind of have to sit through some performances that aren't so great, but everyone's really nice and everyone really understands. It's not like you paid to go in and like experience music that's of a certain quality. I think open mics are a really, really great way to develop your sound. I think that's a really good looking. Sorry, if you Google open mics, or if you kind of search Facebook for open mics or whatever, when obviously when things can reopen again in your area, they can be in pubs, they can be in sorry, under 18. Oh, they can,
The Porters one, a young person I was working with before went down to it. They could perform before 9 o'clock. So I
yeah,
just contacted them in advance and said, "Look, there's a young person who wants to come down to perform. Can they go on first?" And they said, "Yeah, it was fine."
yeah, there are, I don't think there are many promoters out there who really don't want under 18s to come to their shows, because what you find is that I don't know, this might sound really patronizing, but it's true, the fact that if you put on a 14 plus show, everyone gets there on time. Nobody's in the pub round the corner till the first band goes on or the third band goes on. Everyone's there early. People are queuing up outside, and I think that's a really kind of really nice thing about those all ages shows. And whenever we can do them, we do them. Yeah, I can kind of go on and for hours about all ages shows. So I won't
Any
do that.
final questions for Ed
Yeah.
from anybody?
Thanks. These have been really interesting questions, by the way. Thank you. Thank you so much.
If you just want to put your camera on, you don't have to type it or just talk it. It's up to you guys, really.
Cool. Yeah, lighting tech experience. the there's a real the thing with lighting. I know this is kind of outside of the whole artist and stuff. The difference between lighting and live sound is there's less opportunities at a kind of ground level for lighting. I would recommend getting shadowing in, trying to contact lighting engineers who need a shadow, because we always sound engineers the same thing. We always need a bit of a hand setting stuff up. You can kind of learn and gain experience through that. And then but once you get a lighting gig, you can go really high really quickly because there aren't many lighting engineers. That's a really good strategy for getting into the system. Best vocal for live gigs, yeah, SM58. I say Shure SM58s are your standard, your textbook microphone. They're the cheapest good quality mic you can get, unless, like I said, you have a bit of a quieter voice and you want to get this microphone, which is an SE Electronics V7. Give that a little look if you've got a quieter voice. If you've got a loud voice, though, they're terrible, so don't get one if you've got a loud voice. But there are different mics for different people. So it's always good to research what kind of things are out there. But generally, yeah, Shure SM58s are the standard microphones you will find in most, if not all, venues.
Brilliant. Well, I think unless anyone has any final questions now, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks so much, Ed, for your knowledge.
Yeah, it's making me miss gigs and wanting.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. When you were talking about things, I was visualizing myself on stage in the moon, just going like, "Oh, I wish I could do this now." But I'm sure it'll come back soon.
Yeah, it'll come back sooner than you think. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Brilliant. Yeah, well, obviously there's sessions the next few days now, and they're all fantastic. So sign up for those. I would definitely recommend all you Forte people to come along to them, because there's going to be lots of knowledge for people who kind of want to take themselves on to the next stage. And yeah, just tell other people about it. It could be, you know, your neighbour's friend plays a bit of guitar and he's just starting. These sessions are for everyone, and they're free. So get people signed up, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys in the future. Great. Bye, everyone. Thanks, I don't know how to end it. Bye, 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 bye.